Hi, welcome to the Op at Home. I'm Pat Marino, one of the game designers here at the Op, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to Plankton Rising, a cooperative card and dice game for 1 to 4 players. Plankton Rising is set in the SpongeBob universe and will have 1 to 4 players working together to try to keep the Krusty Krab afloat while Plankton is doing everything in his power to get in their way and to steal a Krabby Patty to analyze back in his lab at the Chum Bucket. In order to win this game, players have to complete between 7 and 10 customer orders before Plankton achieves any part of his plan. The number of orders ranges based on the difficulty you want in the game. Plankton can win the game several ways. One of those is to steal all the pieces of a Krabby Patty. Another is to drive away 10 friends from the restaurant. And the final way is to drive away all of the friends on any one player's team. In order to get started, let's walk through a bit of the setup. The first thing you're going to want to do is take the 6 Krabby Patty tiles representing the different components of a Krabby Patty and set them in order to one side of the board. These tiles have 2 sides. On the front is the art showing the Krabby Patty itself, and on the back is a computerized version of that art showing that this tile has been stolen and analyzed by Plankton in his lab. At the start of the game, all of the tiles will show the art side face up. As the game progresses and Plankton steals different parts of a Krabby Patty, these tiles will flip over, giving him additional abilities and making the game more challenging for the players. The next step to the setup is going to be to put the Krusty Krab board in the center of the table. The Krusty Krab board has 2 rooms to it, the front dining room and the back kitchen area, which also includes Mr. Krabs' office. After setting out the Krusty Krab board, put the Chum Bucket figure, all of the dice, the time and theft tokens into a supply near the board. You'll also want to shuffle the Chum Bucket Plankton cards and put them in a face-down pile within reach of all players. After setting out these components, it's time for each player to choose their starting character. The options are SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs. Each starting character has a home-based card representing that character's home, a character card, which you can find in this deck of cards, and a token that matches the icon in the upper left of their home-based card, which you will use to indicate your team's location during the game. After each player has chosen their starting character, in this case SpongeBob and Patrick, take any remaining starting character cards and shuffle them into the draw pile. These characters can still come into play later in the game and may be recruited onto your teams. After shuffling the cards, deal out 8 cards randomly, 4 to the kitchen side and 4 to the dining room side. Now let's talk a little bit about the cards that can come into play during the game. There are 3 different types. Friend cards, which represent different characters from the show that you can add to your team. Villain cards, which have this different design and represent different villains that try to help Plankton or otherwise get in our hero's way. And order cards, which represent different food items that customers entering the Krusty Krab may want. With the setup complete, it's time to start playing the game. On a player's turn, they'll do a number of things which are conveniently outlined on the back of the team-based card. As you can see in this example, the first step to this is to place your team token in a location. And the 2 locations you can choose are the kitchen or the dining room of the Krusty Krab. So as an example, on SpongeBob's turn, he may choose to go into the dining room, which means that he and all of the other friends that might be on his team are now in that location, and this player can interact with the cards that are also in that location, which in this case is 3 friend cards and 1 order card. That means this player can work towards making new friends to add to their team or towards completing that order. If there was a villain in the location, they can also work towards adding time to that villain, which would help to drive them away from the Krusty Krab. Once a player has chosen their location, it's time for Plankton to make his move, and this is represented by turning over the top card of the Plankton deck. In doing so, there will be 2 things revealed. The first is the location where Plankton is, and he's causing trouble in that space, and which piece of the Krusty Krab he's working towards stealing. So in this example, we see that the location given is the kitchen. So we're going to move the Chum Bucket figure to the kitchen. The ingredient that he's working towards stealing is the pickles. So we're going to add 1 theft token to the pickles. Now that we know Plankton's location, a number of different things are going to happen. The first is that any of our friends who are in that location are going to become impatient because of Plankton's presence, which means we have to add a time token to their card. In this case, that affects Don the Whale. If SpongeBob and the rest of his team had also been in that location, a time would be added to each character on this particular team. But since that's not the case, they're safe for now. Plankton is also going to activate any villain abilities in that area. We can see on Man Ray that it says if Plankton is present, add 1 theft to any ingredient. So the active player will choose any ingredient from the Krabby Patty to place a theft token onto. Looking at Doodlebob, it says that if Plankton is present, you may not assign dice to use your friend's abilities this turn. So that means any friends on our active team that have a special ability that needs dice to trigger it cannot be used, and we'll talk more about that later. The last thing we see is that there's an order card here. Plankton also has a negative effect on orders that haven't been completed yet, as he's making the customers waiting for those orders less patient. In this case, it says if Plankton is present, add another theft counter to any ingredient. So because we chose the tomato and onion on the last selection, we might want to put this theft token somewhere else to help spread them out. The reason for this is if any of these ingredients becomes full of tokens and remains that way until the end of a turn, it means that Plankton has successfully stolen it and made a pretty big leap towards stealing a complete Krabby Patty. After resolving all of Plankton's move, it's time for the heroes to fight back a little bit. And in this case, that means that SpongeBob can gather his dice pool and do a number of things to try to help the cause. The first thing is he can use dice to try to make new friends. In order to make a new friend, the dice symbols rolled have to match all of the symbols shown on a friend card. So, for example, Grubby Grouper requires 2 of the triangle symbol to recruit. So if SpongeBob is able to assign 2 dice with that symbol to his card, he will be able to add a new friend to his team this turn. The next thing a player can do on their turn is to try to match their dice to the icons on an order card. As you might remember, orders are required to win the game. You must complete 7 orders to win an easy game, and more for a more difficult game all the way up to 10. In order to complete an order, dice rolled must match all of the symbols on the order card, at which point the player takes it out of play and adds it to their supply to help track progress towards that goal. Completing an order also means that Plankton can no longer activate the negative effect on that order card, which is good for all of the players. The final thing a player might do with their dice is try to add more time tokens to a villain. As we see in this example, there are no villains in SpongeBob's team's location, but if SpongeBob had gone to the kitchen for their turn, he would be able to try to add time to Man Ray or Doodlebob. In order to do that, similar to recruiting friends or completing an order, you need to have dice that match all of the icons on a villain card. If you do so, at the end of the turn, you'll be able to add 1 time token to that villain. It's worth noting that you may only add 1 time token to each villain per turn, so even if you were able to roll those symbols more than once on your turn, you cannot add more than 1 damage to the villain. A player's dice pool is comprised of the dice shown on their team base card, as well as any dice added by friends that are on their team. In this case, we only have SpongeBob on our team so far, and his card says that if we have at least 1 other yellow friend on our team, we can choose to roll an additional yellow die. Since we haven't met that requirement yet, his dice pool will be only the 2 red dice and 1 yellow die shown on his card. The color of these dice is important because it represents the different distribution of icons found on these dice. So, for example, the red dice have more of the BFF red icon on them than the other dice do, whereas this yellow die has more of the triangle muscular arm symbol that's shown on SpongeBob's card. Green dice have more of the shield icon with the trophy, and blue dice have more of the ukulele fun icon shown here. Knowing the distribution of the icons on the dice can be helpful for knowing which cards might be easier for you to gain or complete on your turn. For example, knowing that SpongeBob has this yellow die tells me that he's more likely to roll the triangle icon, which is found on Grubby Grouper as well as on Marty. It also means he's probably a little less likely to roll the flower ukulele icon from the blue dice, which would be needed for the Krabby Patty or the Man Ray in this location. This is part of the reason why SpongeBob chose to go to the dining room this turn, as opposed to the kitchen. Now with all of that in mind, it's time to roll the dice and try to match them to the symbols on the card. The first roll will use all of a player's dice. Once rolled, the player can choose to assign these dice to any card in the location where they are, or to activate certain abilities on friend cards on their team. In this case, looking at the icons, I see that we have 1 triangle icon, which could be useful for recruiting Grubby Grouper, so I'm going to place that there. Once I've made that decision, I cannot move that die to another card, nor can I re-roll it. As long as I have dice remaining in my pool, I can re-roll. However, after each roll, I must assign at least one die to a card or discard one from my pool. If I run out of dice, my turn is over. Now that I've assigned that one die, I'm able to roll again. Now I see that I rolled the 2 triangle icon, and that would be enough by itself to recruit Grubby Grouper, but again, I cannot move this die to another location. However, I can overpay in order to complete that card by assigning 3 of that icon there. With only 1 die left, the only thing I can hope to do is activate an ability on my home base card. In this case, we see that if I roll 1 more triangle icon, I can remove 1 time from any friend, which would mean I could take this time icon off of Don the Whale. So I'm going to roll now and see if that happens. We see instead that I rolled 2 of the BFF icon, which represents friendship, which I'm unfortunately unable to use this turn. I could assign it to Marty, but without the other 2 icons needed there, I'm not able to complete his card. It's worth noting that these dice are returned to the pool at the end of my turn, so another player cannot hope to add to what I've already done. So this die is returned to the pool now as it doesn't do anything, and we work towards resolving the rest of my turn. The first step to resolving a turn is to look for any friend cards that have had all of their dice icons matched, in this case, Grubby Grouper. So I'm going to remove these 2 dice from his card, and if he had any time tokens on his card, I would be able to remove those as well, because I've made this new friend and he's going to be joining my team with SpongeBob. We also see that this is going to help SpongeBob's ability, which says if I have at least 1 other yellow friend, which I do, I can roll an extra yellow die on my turn. So this means on my next turn I'll roll 2 red and 2 yellow dice, which will help me get more cards. After doing this, I'll want to see if there are any villains that have all of their dice icons matched on their card. In this case, there were no villains in my location, but if there were, and I had matched all of their icons, I would add 1 time to the card, as shown here with Man Ray. Since that's not the case, I move on to checking orders. Again, as described earlier, if I had matched dice to all of the icons on an order, I would be able to take that order and add it to my collection. You'll want to make sure to place these cards in front of you, turned at an angle to remind you that these orders don't have any additional abilities for you during the game, but it's important to track how many we've completed and which players completed them. So after a player has rolled and assigned all of their dice or discarded them from their pool, it's time to wrap up the end of their turn and figure out the effects of those dice. The first is to see if there are any friends that have all of their dice icons matched. This is true for Grubby Grouper, so we're going to remove those dice. We would also remove any time tokens on his card, and then add him to SpongeBob's team. This means from now on, this team has any ability listed on this card, which says that once per turn you may re-roll any dice before assigning dice. It also means that SpongeBob's ability, which says if there's 1 other yellow friend on this team, you gain an extra yellow die, is now active. So on this player's next turn, they will get the 2 red and 1 yellow die from their starting pool, and 1 additional yellow die. Next, we would check to see if the dice icons for any of the villains have been matched. In this case, there were no villains in our location, so this was not possible. But if the player had been in this location of the kitchen and had matched all of the symbols on Man Ray, they would add 1 time token to Man Ray's card. Every time a time token is added to a villain card, that player gets to draw a bonus Spatula token from the supply. Spatula tokens have a variety of icons and abilities on them that are shared by all players. That means that this token can be used by any player on any turn except for the turn in which it was drawn. Some of these effects allow you to remove theft tokens from Krabby Patty ingredients, others allow you to remove time from friends, and still others show different dice icons that can be spent just like dice to match the symbols needed to complete a card in your location. So for example, this Friendship BFF icon could have been used to help make progress towards completing Marty's card. After resolving the damage on villains, we would check to see if any orders have been completed. Any order that has all of its dice icons matched by dice will be then removed from play and placed in front of the player who completed it to keep track of not only how many orders are completed, but who specifically finished them. This is important for some card effects that may come out later in play. After resolving all of our dice, the dice are returned to the dice pool, and then we'll check to see if any friends or villains have all of their time spaces filled. Any card that has had all of its time spaces filled, regardless of whether it is in the center in one of these locations or in a player's team, are removed from play. In the event that a villain is removed from play, this is good for the players because it takes that threat away from the game. However, any friend that has all of its time token spaces filled is also removed from play and set aside. If at any point 10 or more friends have been removed this way, the players will lose the game. So it's very important to make sure those time tokens don't stack up on the cards. Once any affected cards have been removed from play, any orders have been added to a player's supply, and any friends recruited, it's time to replace open spaces in the center of the board by drawing the top cards from the deck. In this case, we'll add Grandma SquarePants, and we'll draw another card to add SpongeBob's parents. These cards are now available for the next player. The active player then takes their token back to their supply. After refilling all of the cards in the center, the next step is to check the Krabby Patty. This tracks Plankton's progress towards stealing the different pieces of the Krabby Patty. If any of these tiles were full, having a theft token on each space, we would remove all of the theft tokens back to the supply and turn the tile over, showing that it has been stolen and analyzed in Plankton's lab. As we can see on this particular tile, it says that all players will add 1 time to the friends on their team with the least time. So, in the event that we turn over one of these cards again and it shows the bun, rather than adding a theft token to it, we activate that ability, which would require all players to add time to friends on their team, which is a really bad effect for the players. So it's really important to try to do everything we can to stop Plankton from stealing the different pieces of the Krabby Patty. As the game progresses, you'll find that some of the friends have abilities that let you remove theft tokens, and so there are powerful ways that you can slow Plankton's progress and give yourself some breathing room as you try to complete the required number of orders to win the game. After making new friends, adding time to villains, and completing any orders that were finished on this turn, you want to see if any friends or villains have all of the time spaces on their card filled. In this case, those cards are removed from play. If it's a villain, that's going to be good for the players because it takes that villain out for the remainder of the game. If it's a friend, the same effect is true, and it's worth remembering that if 10 or more friends are removed from play in this way, the players lose the game. So, for an example, if Plankton had continued to come to this location, wearing away at Don the Whale's patience, his time tokens would eventually fill up, and there would be 4 tokens on this card. If at the end of my turn those tokens are still there, I'll remove them all from the card and discard this card to the side of the table. You want to leave these face up within view of all players as a reminder of how many friends have been chased away. And again, you'll want to check to see if there's ever 10 or more there, indicating that the players have lost. After checking the tiles of the Krabby Patty, it's time to check for endgame conditions before we move on to the next player's turn. The first thing we want to look for is if 10 or more friends have left the Krusty Krab and accumulated on the side of the board. If that's the case, the players have lost. The next thing we'll want to check is if there is any player who no longer has any friend cards left on their team. For example, if all of Patrick's time spaces had filled on the previous turn and he had been discarded, this player would have no friends left on their team. This means that all players have lost. The last thing we'll want to check for as a lose condition is whether or not all of the Krabby Patty tiles have been flipped. If all 6 tiles show the computer side, this means Plankton has successfully stolen a Krabby Patty to analyze in its lab, and the Krusty Krab is doomed. And again, this means the players have lost. The fourth and final thing we'll want to check for is if the required number of orders have been completed. At the beginning of the game, all players should decide how many orders they want to complete to win. Again, 7 for an easy game, and more for a harder game all the way up to 10. If that number of orders have been completed in front of all the players, this means the players have won the game. In the event that a lose condition and the win condition happen on the same turn, the victory goes to the players. If none of these endgame conditions are met, then play passes to the next player, who follows the same procedure, starting by selecting a location for their team, flipping a card for Plankton and resolving its effect, and then rolling dice to make new friends, complete orders, and chase away villains. Play will continue in this manner until the players have either completed the required number of orders or until Plankton has won. And that's how you play SpongeBob Plankton Rising. This game is for ages 8 and up, It's for 1 to 4 players, and it plays in about 45 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed this preview and learning more about SpongeBob Plankton Rising. For more information, you can follow us on social media and visit theop.games. Thanks for watching!